Now, the executive summary is a really nice glossy document. So I've got an example here. We've got details of the students' project. So they've got a project name called ClearPath, and on the back there's a project title and their website, and they may have Twitter and Facebook sites on there as well. But it's a nice glossy document. And so when the sponsor reads this, so for this particular project, it's the surgeon who's going to read this, going to get this nice document, and he's going to look at, it's actually the first thing he's going to read is probably the research findings. And if we look at the key findings, you can see that they've got a really nice list of illustrations with text explaining what these key findings were. Now, going back to the start of the document, the introduction section is very, very brief, and that's because you just want to provide a very short overview of the project and the purpose of the project, essentially. I mean, why are we looking at lithotripsy and how it could be used within the clinical environment as a treatment for urological problems. And the group has identified a very clear clinical demand for this sort of technology, and which is why in the aims and objectives they explain very clearly and concisely what the overview of the project will do, and how, as a team, how they will achieve the project aims. So that leads on to the key findings. Now, what the students next do is they provide a series of limitations, and really they shouldn't have done that. They should have incorporated this information within the key findings, because what you actually want to do is relate the limitations within the key findings, so that the reader, so in this case a surgeon, he's going to go straight to this section, the future work, or should I say, could be written as recommendations for action. So, okay, you've done all this work, you found all this data, and there were obviously some problems, but what sort of recommendations would you propose for future studies? And so in this section, instead of having future work, you would have a title which said recommendation for actions, and they explain very, very nicely what sort of studies the future people could actually engage with in future studies. Now, you'll notice that within this glossy document there are no references, and the reason why there's no references is because there don't need to be any references. At the end of the day, the guys have written a 200-page technical report which has all the details in there and has hundreds of references in there, so there's no need to incorporate that within your executive summary. So this is an excellent example of an executive summary. Now, these guys haven't taken the glossy approach. They've written a very, very wordy introduction, which is completely unnecessary. They didn't need to incorporate all of this information. It takes around, let me just turn over. Yeah, we don't get until we get to page 2 do we actually get to the aims and objectives. I mean, these have been written, nicely, but the problem that I found with this executive summary is that the key findings did not necessarily relate to the objectives of the work. Mm-hmm. So as an example, some of the mechanical characterization information, or findings rather, didn't support what the objectives. So I can't actually find it now. That was it. So they were looking at a unique specimen identifier system. This wasn't actually mentioned in the key findings, so that was really strange. I'm not sure if the students forgot to include that or what. The other issue with the key findings is that there's no justification for the work. So there's no, what's the relevance of all of this work? They repeated several sentences as well, so it was a little bit obvious that each section was written by somebody else, and what they didn't do was proofread that whole document very carefully. At the end of the day, the company is going to read this, so you need to ensure that it is grammatically correct and that the language is perfect and the spelling is perfect. I know they may sound like simple things, but you need to ensure that it does read very well. Also, illustrations, you're going to have pictures in there, we need to be able to see it. There's absolutely I can't see anything in these illustrations. The figure legends are a little bit vague, so if we go to this example, all this figure legend says is that it's a graph of strength against porosity. Well, I can see that on the X and Y axis. Why they've incorporated that information as a figure legend, I have absolutely no reason. I don't know why. They shouldn't have bothered to do that. If you're going to have a figure legend, explain what you did. And for examples of that, look at papers. Look at how authors in publications describe their figure legends. There was actually no statistics in any of this information as well, which is a problem, because if you're presenting data, it needs to be statistically relevant as well. This data, however, was very nice. It was illustrated really well, very, very clear. The figure legends, the descriptions were written very nicely, and the only comment that I would make is that within this figure we've got a bar chart here, which looks very nice, but then for some reason they've incorporated the numbers above each bar, which seems a bit pointless really, because we can see what's on the y-axis anyway. Now, the executive summary then ends. So there's no recommendations for actions. So when the industrial read this, they'll go, well, we've got all this data, that's great, but where does it go? What happens next? And really there should be a section in here which explains, the future work. What sort of actions would you recommend? And we've got a whole page of references there. Unnecessary, completely unnecessary, because all of these references are in there in the technical report. So the third example is we've got a nice title page there, so a lovely illustration, and the team of students and the group's logo, which is actually very, very nice. Again, a very, very wordy rationale, which is completely unnecessary. It takes a while until we get to the aims and objectives. The key findings, I was a little bit disturbed by some of the key findings. I don't see that as a key finding. I don't see the relevance of that. And really, we shouldn't have bullet pointed information here. It should be written as text in paragraphs. So you need to explain what your key findings are, and then you need to justify your key findings. So explain very critically, why this key finding is important and how it relates to the academic literature. And they haven't actually done any of that. They've said, okay, this is what we found within this particular set of data. So we're looking at how gag synthesis varies in response to mechanical stimulation. Okay, what's the point of that? We don't see any of that in there. And then some of the recommendations for future work is actually hidden within the key findings, and really they should incorporate that as a separate section, which is a shame really, because the illustrations within the executive summary are really, really nice, and then it just ends with a list of references, which again is unnecessary. And really the students need to write very clearly the recommendation for actions, which is what's missing in this executive summary.